I love that line about the roar in the heavens. It's so good to be able to roar together with you in worship. And I am really thankful for this student body and for our faculty and our staff and alumni that are praying for you for the start of our semester. So just know how grateful I am from my heart. Let me share with you a parable just to get into this idea. Boy, there's something crackling, isn't there? Let me see if I can get that straightened away. So here's a parable for you, all right? Listen close. Animals eat plants from the ground, which are nourished by what comes out of the animals. Yeah, so I'm personally not very experienced with farming, but Danny Herod, wow, that is really, Danny Herod, grew up on a dairy farm, and so I got to talking with Danny in the copier room the other day, and we got to talking about dirt, and as ancestors of Adam, we've got roots in dirt, so to say, don't we? And Danny helped me understand how things kind of grow a little bit, how things kind of work in the soil, and how plants grow, and it wasn't far along in the conversation, we got to talking about manure and animals' manure. There's the parable. Animals eat plants from the ground, which are nourished by what comes out of the animals. Yeah. So it's kind of like Miracle Grow in the dirt. You know what I mean? Manure is awesome. Danny Herod factoid, okay? Danny didn't know I was going to quote him here. Because manure is pretty high in nitrogen, it's so high in nitrogen that one of the best ways for manure to be used as fertilizer, one of the best ways is to blend it with compost, because the manure kind of helps break down the bacteria in the compost. Actually, manure kind of spreads the decomposition of the stuff in the compost, and it kind of heats up the compost pile. Manure, it's a pretty wonderful thing. It eliminates the possibility of burning the plants, Danny said. You can burn the plants if you apply the manure just to the plants. This is dirt. So you combine it with compost, and then you till it into the soil into the fall. You let it sit all winter, and it's ready for the spring planting. I guess you could say God wastes nothing. You know what I mean? He wastes nothing to grow, especially us. He wastes nothing to grow anything in us. Pretty challenging last year for some of us. For some of you, I'm guessing. I think we're all kind of looking forward, looking ahead to what this new school year is going to be like. It's going to be a moment to reset our minds and to refocus on why in the world we're here and our role in restoring people. Our role in restoring people to Jesus. And the reason that many of you have been able to hang in there through this past year, the reason many of you have endured is because you've been driven by that bigger idea. You have this passion in you that's propelling us, even though it's a pressure cooker sometimes, like we just were singing about. Let me illustrate this way, another parable. The parable of boiling water and coffee beans. Maybe you've heard about this. A daughter was complaining to her father about how her life was going. She said, as soon as I solve one problem, another one comes up, and it's just, I'm tired of the struggle. Well, her dad was a chef, and so he said, come here. Took his daughter to the kitchen, and he pulled three pots out. Sorry about that. He pulled 3 pots out, and he put water in all 3 of the pots, and he put all 3 pots over a high flame on the stove. In one of the pots, he put carrots. In another pot, he put some eggs, and in the other pot, he put some ground coffee beans, and he let them just get to a boil. My apologies, guys. The daughter, teenage girl, rather impatiently waited, wondering what in the world was this all about. And after a while, the father kind of turned to her, and he turned the burners off just to make sure she was. So in the kitchen, they kind of get to a boil, and the father looks at his daughter. She's kind of rolling her eyes, wasting time, looking at her phone. He turns the burners off, and he fishes out the carrots, put them in their own bowl, fishes out the eggs, puts them in their own little dish, and pours the coffee into another dish. And then he turns and asks her, so what do you see? Now, by this time, she's a little frustrated, and she goes, "Is this a trick, Dad?" "No, no trick, honey." "What do you see?" Rolling her eyes, carrots, eggs, and coffee, of course. "Yep," and he brought her closer, and he asked her to actually touch the carrots. And she did, and she saw, or felt, that the carrots were rather kind of soft. "Well, grab one of the eggs and break it." And so she did, and cracked the egg, and it cracked a little differently than normal eggs, because as she peeled the skin off, she realized it was hard-boiled. And then he gave her opportunity to sip some of the coffee, which brought a smile, finally. Rich flavor of the coffee. And he asked, she asked him, I guess, "So Dad, what's the deal? What's the point here?" And he explained that each of them had faced the same adversity, boiling water, but each had reacted a little differently. And he went on to kind of use this parable. The carrots, they went in pretty strong. They were pretty firm, pretty rigid, unrelenting. But after some time subjected to the boiling water, what happened to the carrots? They became soft, weak. The eggs put in, its thin outer shell actually was used to protect the liquid interior of the egg. But over time, that egg, it got hardened on the inside through the boiling water. And then the coffee beans, the ground coffee beans, kind of unique, being in the boiling water, they actually changed the water. Kind of changed the water. And his daughter, he asked her daughter, "So when adversity comes knocking at your door, darling, which are you?" Good question for us, I think. Which are you? All right, when adversity comes knocking, are you going to become soft? Are you going to become hard inside? Are you going to be a transforming influence? Which of the three would you say? Since no life is pain-free, may we be like ground coffee beans. May God grind us if necessary for us to be of use for God to influence our surroundings with flavor, even through adversity. One professor of psychiatry, retired professor from Harvard, Armin Nicolai, he said this: "How we react to it," talking about adversity or pain, boiling water, "how we react to it determines how it influences the quality of our lives. If we believe that a supreme creator loves us, if we believe that he loves us and ultimately controls our destiny, we will endure with patience and hope." So with patience, with endurance, we, like coffee beans, we're kind of being strengthened for God's kingdom influence, but not by our own strength, not by our own doing, but by God's internal dwelling, by his grace, by his truth, and therefore permeating through us. I'm talking about being a subversive kingdom influencer for Jesus. God's kingdom. That's the undercurrent for this theme. God's kingdom is subversive. It's not of this earth. God's kingdom influence happens by his, can I use the word, kind of covert ability to transform, kind of in a paradoxical, upside down sort of a way. God's kingdom is often not on display. God's kingdom is easily overlooked. God's kingdom is like roasted ground coffee beans changing its surrounding. Like, for example, 1 Kings chapter 19. "And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper, an uproar happening from a subversive action." So this idea of a subversive way of God, that's how he likes to work, to lovingly but subtly influence and to transform and to change someone by engaging with them and wisely embedding oneself into our world. And therefore, for us to take on a godlike character trait, for us to be embedded and to be wisely engaging into the ecosystem of our culture and our world, so that over time, change happens and the water changes, even though there might be some boiling or some pressure. It's not manipulation, I don't think. God manipulates it. I think he's incarnating his grace. He's incarnating his truth through us so that we could live it out in a very genuine, personal way. It's kind of like a missionary. You'll hear this in Mr. Herod's classes. A missionary crossing cultures. The most successful missionaries are the ones that don't take a Western idea and implant that, but the ones who sit patiently, he or she who learns the language, embedding themselves in through learning the unspoken norms of the town and the village by embedding oneself into that people group's way of life over years, patiently. God's kingdom influence is like that. It's subtle. Sometimes it's unnoticed. God's kingdom impact is seemingly slow and apparently ineffective sometimes. And I would say dismissed oftentimes. God's kingdom, though, is actively subversive. Over time, we're used by God as kind of fertilizer for a dynamic gospel transformation in the dirt of people's lives. We're like compost and manure, and we're blended into we're like coffee being ground and into the boiling point of people's day, and there we are in a subversive way. That's the force of God's kingdom by his grace at work through you and me on earth, his rule, his reign, but in humility, washing feet, unnoticed, as a servant-hearted human toward another human, a subversive kingdom. You know, it involves holiness. It involves forgiveness. Subversion requires a truth that's grounded objectively in Scripture. It requires a caring ear. Subversive kingdoms towards another person. It's not about your ego. It's not about my ego. It's just good deeds that are done unnoticed by many. Subversion in our culture, it's kind of odd. It's actually unusual. Subversion is abnormal in many ways. So in contrast to God's subversive kingdom, in contrast to God's loving subversive kingdom is the kingdom of ourself, the kingdom of self, which is heavily defended territory, isn't it? People, even us, might give a nod to God. We might like acknowledge him in general. We might pay respects to him kind of like, yeah, he's sort of the big guy in the sky, but don't really want him to be invading our turf. Comforts over discipleship. Can we just be transparent? Our pursuit of comfortable living, which is really easy in our nation, our pursuit of that is doomed to destruction. You know why? Because another kingdom is right at the door knocking, secretly forming its way, taking the place of the kingdom we have fallen deeply in love with, of comfort. I believe the kingdom of this world, I believe the kingdom of today will succumb to and be overwhelmed by the kingdom of our God and the kingdom of our Christ. I believe this new kingdom is actually already among us. The methods that make nations powerful, the methods that make somebody powerful and influential today, like economic things or military or technology or information or wealth or even position, or those are powerful things. Those methods are not suited for God's kingdom. The methods require subversion. Consider the subversive working of God as recorded in the Bible. These things, they result in an uproar. Listen to these couple of verses from Zechariah 4. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. And Jesus said in Matthew 5, you are the salt. And he said later in chapter 13, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and threw in his field, sowed it. It's the smallest of all seeds. And then the Apostle Paul picked this up. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him. That's not a part of our natural culture today. Would you understand that? That's not our comfortable level. He says, I was with you in, and here's a subversive way, weakness. It's upside down from the norm, isn't it? That's the subversive kingdom. So while at Boise Bible College, for this year, the next 4 years, the faculty and the staff, we are not willing to help any of you become what you want to be. We're going to help you and equip you to become what Jesus wants you to be. And that may be subversive, and that may be challenging, so that you would in turn help others become what they are desired by God to be. How will that happen? By being subversive, by being kingdom-minded in a real subversive way. And if you let Jesus, he's gonna undermine the kingdom of yourself. If you let him, he will undermine your kingdom in order to establish his. And he'll replace your kingdom with his kingdom so that you will become the servant, subversive leader to help others become what God dreams them to become. Unfortunately, that biblical idea, that method of subversion is easily, frequently discarded for the favor of self-promotion, likely due to vanity. Vanity. We don't like being wallflowers in the world society. We want to be noticed. Show me the man or the woman who is not looking for prestige. That person will make history subversively. For example, Dwight L. Moody. It's hard to overstate the influence of Dwight L. Moody in his heyday. This late 19th century evangelist, his preaching sparked multitudes of conversions and church revivals on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Moody's visibility and popularity would be on par with our celebrities today. But Moody constantly ran from and fled from the trappings of vanity, of stardom. He knew it was fickle. He unselfishly, to counteract it, he unselfishly pursued a path of servanthood. So one example, it's been told that Moody hosted a large contingent of European pastors for a conference he would hold in Massachusetts every year. And the pastors from Europe, they were housed in dormitories, and according to European custom, they put their shoes outside their door at night, expecting that a servant boy would come and collect the shoes and shine them for the next morning, except this is Massachusetts, not Manchester. There ain't no servant boys here in Boston area. So Moody noticed the shoes, and rather than embarrass those European pastors for their cultural ignorance of being in America or their presumption, Moody quietly gathered the shoes, and he spent into the early mornings of the early hours of the morning shining them himself and then putting them out in front of the door. The next morning, Moody's pastor friends collected their shined shoes, none the wiser of the selfless, humble service that was rendered by Moody. Moody served in secret. That is subversive kingdom work. Unnoticed. A servant leader's real work is like what Ivan Illich calls shadow work. The work nobody gets paid for. And few notice, but makes a world of difference. That's how God's kingdom works. And the best method to participate in God's mission will be that kind of subversive work. And Jesus was the master at this. He set the bar so high of what it means to be a subversive kingdom servant leader. How did Jesus do it? He was subtle, with a motive to undermine the decadent world and the roots that had taken root into people's lives in order to advance his kingdom, God's kingdom, into each person, beginning with you and me. So Jesus was a master of subversive living, and there are a couple of expressions of subversion that we should look at, that I would encourage you to submit to as we start our semester. Here's the first one. Jesus' favorite spiritual exercise was subversive. It was kingdom prayers, early in the morning. Early in the morning, he went first, directly to the Father, before checking his Snapchat, before checking his Instagram, before checking his other media feeds, before anything else, early, often making space to be, just to be with him. When his mental slate was clean and the RAM of his computer was wiped clean, nothing was happening, with a pure mind, sitting still in his Father's presence, just sharing his thoughts, sharing his feelings, and listening to the Father's thoughts. So this year, This year, if you want to see God's kingdom be realized in you and therefore on earth, then take the spiritual discipline of prayer ultra seriously, like Jesus did. Meet with him first. No other human interaction before the Father. Take it seriously. Nothing on media. You do something, you discipline yourselves, whether you're on campus or off campus, figure it out so that the first thing you don't look at is your phone. Figure it out, because that is not first. And that's what Jesus was a master at. If you want to be like him in this subversion work. So RAs, raise the bar. Class leaders, seniors, freshmen, sophomores, faculty, and staff. May we set it up to be a key role in our life for kingdom expansion to happen. It means we take prayer so seriously early in the morning when it's all quiet and it's still and we're listening to God's loving voice in Scripture. Prayers are like manure added to compost. Prayers, it creates heat in the compost. Prayers, they work in the subterranean of that compost. Prayers are like inhaling and exhaling the presence of God himself as we submit to his voice for Jesus. For Jesus. Prayer was something he did often. It was intense. It wasn't soft. And he submitted to the Father and he allowed God, can I go so far as, he allowed God to kind of grind him into a coffee bean because the boiling water of his ministry was hard. So consecrate yourself at the start. Consecrate yourself right here, right now, this week, to be a praying disciple, to be God's kingdom servant leader, for God's kingdom to come to earth through your subversive work. Here's another thing to consider, another expression of Jesus' life. Jesus' favorite form of teaching was subversive. It was kingdom parables. You'll hear this a lot with Mr. Russell in his Gospels classes, Life of Christ classes. If prayer is directed to God, then parables are actually directed to us from God. Jesus was a master at indirection, indirectly kind of instructing a parable. It sounds kind of normal. It sounds kind of ordinary, casual stories in the Bible about dirt and seed, about meals and coins, stories about sheep and bandits and victims and merchants and farmers. And they are wholly secular. You know, of the 40-some parables that were recorded in the scriptures, only a couple even mention the name of God in them. As people heard Jesus tell stories, they sensed that it was safe. They sensed there was nothing threatening to their own sovereignty. So they heard the parables and they kind of relaxed their defenses. They kind of let their guard down. And some people kind of walked away perplexed. Some people kind of wondered what they meant. But all those stories kind of got lodged in their imagination, Jesus' subtle way. Kingdom seed was subversively planted as Jesus told parables. And then, like a time bomb, they went off at unplanned points in their life. Those subtle seeds of truth and grace in parabolic form exploded in their unprotected hearts and their minds. And all of a sudden, the kingdom seed was there in front of them to be allowed to take root within. Eugene Peterson adds, parables subversively slip past our defenses. So consecrate yourself. Right here, right now at the start. Consecrate yourself. Willingly letting Jesus' teaching penetrate. Willingly, submissively lowering your guard in order to prepare you for kingdom work. So kingdom prayers, kingdom parables, I want to implore us as a group to submit to both. Submit to these. They don't bully us, they don't arm twist us, they don't boss us into action. They just quietly allow us to align with the King as he takes residence here. And when united, prayers and parables, a little like manure and compost, a little like boiling water and coffee. When united, prayers and parables are subversive ways for the kingdom seed to get planted and to take root so that you can be of use the way God dreams to use you for his glory, to introduce hope and to restore friends one person at a time. So may we daily, we have 15 weeks, 16 weeks this semester, may we daily, up to Christmas break, work our prayer life and work at submitting to the teachings of Jesus, even in a parabolic form, so that we can be his subversive agents of kingdom transformation, of purpose, and of hope. It's a grand journey that requires great discipline. Are we game for it? He wants to do something powerfully through you, but it won't meet the world's standards of power. It'll be secret-like. Pray with me. We're really challenged by that idea, Jesus, to be honest with you. We are challenged with ego inflation and notoriety. We are challenged that our definition point is by people affirming things that we post. Those are not bad. We're just really challenged by this idea of being known and our identity being anchored in what people think and say about us to their friends. So as we start this semester, here we are, and we're submitting to you in prayer to hear your voice. We're submitting to you that you would instruct us in a parabolic sort of a way. We are submitting to you, Jesus, because we wholeheartedly, right here in this room, we're all united in this idea of we want the roar in the heavens to be from you through us in a servant-leading sort of a way. And so here we are. Thanks for working by your grace and your truth in us. In your name, Jesus, amen.